Greetings humanity of the world. Humanity of the internet. And all participating members. We are anonymous. Collecting rainwater on your own property can now lead to jail time, as proven by a man from Oregon, who was just sentenced to prison for doing just that. Who owns the rain, you may ask? The United States corporate paid government now. Not so long ago, it was common practice across much of the world to collect rainwater into man-made wells on your property as a means of farming, irrigation, and having fresh clean water. It was just as common as canning your own food, having knowledge of at least some basic survival skills, and being self-sufficient. It was not even that many generations ago that all of this was common practice. People born before World War II were pretty adept at these skills, as they were a necessity to survival. One of the main and easiest ways to ensure survival is collecting rainwater on your own property. The practical uses for storing and collecting rainwater are numerous, and many people across the world, in rural areas, still do it today, for all of the reasons mentioned. However, over the past few years, laws making the collection of rainwater illegal have been causing an uproar across the United States. Now, a man from Gray Point, Oregon has been sentenced to 30 days in prison for storing collected rainwater on his very own property, and the public is outraged. A rural Oregon man was sentenced Wednesday to 30 days in jail and over $1,500 in fines because he had 3 reservoirs on his property to collect and use rainwater. Gary Harrington of Eagle Point, Oregon, says he plans to appeal his conviction in Jackson County, Oregon Circuit Court on 9 misdemeanor charges under a 1925 law for having what state water managers called 3 illegal reservoirs on his property and for filling the reservoirs with rainwater and snow runoff. The government is bullying. Gary Harrington told CNSnews.com in an interview on Thursday, April 9, 2015. They have just gotten to be big bullies, and if you just lay over and die and give up, that just makes them bigger bullies. So we, as Americans, we need to stand up for our constitutional rights, for our rights as humans, and hang tough. This is a good country, and we will prevail, he said. The court has given Gary Harrington 2 weeks to report to the Jackson County Jail to begin serving his sentence. Gary Harrington said the case first began in 2002, when state water managers so-called told him there were complaints about the 3 reservoirs, ponds, on his more than 170 acres of land. According to Oregon water laws, all water is publicly owned. Therefore, anyone who wants to store any type of water on their property must first obtain a permit from state water managers. Gary Harrington said he applied for 3 permits to legally house reservoirs for storm and snow water runoff on his property. One of the reservoirs had been on his property for 37 years, he said. Though the State Water Resources Department initially approved his permits in 2003, the state and a state court ultimately reversed the decision. They issued me my permits. I had my permits in hand, and they retracted them just arbitrarily, basically. They took them back and said no, you cannot have them, so I have been fighting it ever since, Gary Harrington told CNSnews.com. The case, he said, is centered on a 1925 law, which states that the city of Medford holds exclusive rights to all core sources of water in the Big Bud Creek watershed and its tributaries. Way back in 1925, the city of Medford got a unique withdrawal that withdrew all, supposedly all, the water out of a single basin, and supposedly for the benefit of the city of Medford, Gary Harrington told CNSnews.com. However, the 1925 law does not mention anything about collecting rainwater or snow melt. And he believes that he has been falsely charged and convicted. The withdrawal said the stream and its tributaries. It did not mention anything about rainwater, and it did not mention anything about snow melt, and it did not mention anything about diffused water, but yet now, they are trying to expand that to include the rainwater, and they are using me as the goat to do it, Gary Harrington said. But Tom Paul, administrator of the Oregon Water Resources Department, claims that Gary Harrington has been violating the state's water use law by diverting water from streams running into the Big Butte River. The law that he is actually violating is not the 1925 provision, but it is Oregon law that says all of the water in the state of Oregon is public water, and if you want to use that water, either to divert it or to store it, you have to acquire a water right from the state of Oregon before doing that activity, Tom Paul told CNSnews.com. Tom Paul says the 1925 law does apply because he so claims Gary Harrington constructed dams to block a tributary to the Big Butte, which Medford uses for its water supply. There are dams across channels, water channels where the water would normally flow if it were not for the dam, and so those dams are stopping the water from flowing in the channel and storing it, holding it so it cannot flow downstream, Tom Paul said. Gary Harrington, however, argued in court that he is not diverting water from Big Butte Creek, but the dams capturing the rainwater and snow runoff, or diffused water, are on his own property, and that therefore, the runoff does not fall under the jurisdiction of the state water managers, and does not violate the 1925 Act. In 2007, a Jackson County Circuit Court judge denied Gary Harrington's permits and found that he had illegally withdrawn the water at issue from appropriation, other than for the city of Medford. According to Tom Paul, Gary Harrington entered a guilty plea at the time, received 3 years probation, and was ordered to open up the water gates. A very short period of time following the expiration of his probation, he once again closed the gates and refilled the reservoirs, Tom Paul said. So, this has been going on for some time, and I think frankly, the court felt that Mr. Harrington was not getting the message, and decided that they had already given him probation once, and required him to open the gates, and he refilled his reservoirs, and it was business as usual for him, so I think the court it felt it needed, to give a stiffer penalty, to get Mr. Harrington's attention. In 2 weeks, if unsuccessful in his appeals, Gary Harrington told CNSnews.com that he will report to the Jackson County Jail to serve his sentence. I follow the rules. If I'm mandated to report, I'm going to report. Of course, I'm going to do what it takes in the meantime to prevent that, but if I'm not successful, I will be there, Gary Harrington said. But Gary Harrington also said that he will never stop fighting the government on this issue. When something is wrong, you just, as a human being, have to put your foot down and say, this is wrong. You just cannot take away any more of my rights, and from here on in, I'm going to fight. So, it is now a crime to collect rainwater, especially when it is on your own property. The rainwater is for all humans and animals of all kinds alike to use as they see fit. Not for corrupt corporate paid governments to put a label on it and say it belongs to them. The corruption has gotten more cynical, and we, as Anonymous, as a collective, will do our very best to see that corrupt corporate paid governments do not get away with stealing every bit of Earth's natural resources that were intended for all species on our planet. So to the corrupt corporate paid governments, expect us